Hey, fellow Gen Xers. Today I'm going to be captioning and periodically reacting to a video from Psychology Research Lab about solitude. Society has spent centuries drilling one message into our heads with relentless consistency. Find someone, settle down, get married, have children, and you will be happy. This formula has been presented not as a suggestion, but as the only legitimate path to a fulfilled life. From childhood fairy tales to Hollywood rom-coms, from Thanksgiving dinner conversations to the well-meaning but suffocating questions of relatives, the narrative is always the same. Are you seeing anyone? When are you getting married? You're not getting any younger. The implication is clear. If you are single, something is wrong with you. If you live alone, you must be broken. If you choose not to marry, you must be incomplete. But here's the truth that millions of people across America and around the world are beginning to understand. I guess I'm lucky that I really don't have this problem and haven't had this problem. My family has been pretty understanding. I mean, I've been in great relationships, don't get me wrong. I've just, it's been a path I've evolved to realize that I'm better off single, which I'll get to throughout the video as we're talking about these things. But my family's been pretty understanding when I've brought girlfriends to family reunions. They've been accepting of them. And when I've come single, they've been accepting of that. But the pressure I felt is from society, definitely. And I suspect it's even more difficult for a woman because society always expects us to be with someone. Imagine if you asked someone who was in a relationship or married, when are you going to end your relationship? Or when are you going to get a divorce? That would be completely rude, right? But it's totally acceptable for people to ask you when you're single, when are you going to find someone, as if there's some kind of law that you have to do that. And that pressure that we feel from society, once we eliminate that, we can think more clearly of whether or not we want to be single or in a relationship. Single is not a problem to be solved. For many people, it is a deliberate, empowering, deeply satisfying way to live. The number of single-person households in the United States has been climbing steadily for decades. According to census data, more than a third of American adults are not married, and a growing number of them are choosing that path intentionally. These are not people who have failed at love. These are people who examined the social script handed to them and decided it did not fit them. They are building lives that are rich with meaning, connection, freedom, and purpose, without needing a romantic partner to validate their existence. And research is beginning to catch up with what they already know. The old assumption that marriage equals happiness is not just outdated, it is largely inaccurate. Studies that once glorified marriage and stigmatized single people are now being challenged by newer, more rigorous research showing the happiness gap between married and single people is far smaller than anyone believed, and in many cases, it does not exist at all. People tend to experience a brief spike in happiness around the time of their wedding, but within a year or two, they return to their baseline level of satisfaction. And I can totally relate to that because for me personally, being in a relationship has been kind of like a drug. And if you treat a person like a drug, that's not going to end well for either person. It's basically when you get in a relationship, there's that infatuation stage, and I know it's supposed to evolve into a deeper love. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But in the beginning, most of the time, we're thinking about what we can get out of the other person. Even if we're doing nice things for them and not thinking of it consciously, we're not really being altruistic. We're thinking of what we can get out of the relationship. And when we go into a relationship like that, seeking some kind of validation or seeking something from them, we tend to become dependent on that. And we're on this hedonic treadmill. Basically, our brains are set up to go back to baseline once we get used to the pleasure that we're feeling. And we feel that pleasure in the beginning of the relationship. You get all the butterflies. You want to shut everything else out of your life sometimes, which is unfortunate. Maybe sometimes you're including them in your life and it can be healthy. It's different for everybody. I'm not saying everybody should be single, but I'm speaking from my perspective that in the beginning, I tend to get really excited about being with a person, and then I burn out quickly and I start to realize what I've been neglecting with myself. And I've always been better off single in a lot of ways. I've been a better friend, a better son, a better employee. I've taken care of myself better, all these things that I've done better. And my overall level of happiness has actually been higher when I'm single, despite not having all the ups and downs within a relationship. Like I said, that's coming from my perspective. It's not necessarily for everybody. Marriage does not permanently elevate happiness. It creates a temporary emotional high, much like any major life event, and then the brain adapts. Meanwhile, the assumption that having children brings lasting fulfillment has also been called into question. Multiple studies have found no consistent evidence that parenthood increases long-term life satisfaction. Some parents require deep meaning in raising children, but others report significant stress, financial strain, and a decline in marital satisfaction. The point is not that marriage or parenthood are bad. The point is that they're not universally good for everyone. That's the thing. It's different for every person. My own suspicion is that people with children are more likely to over-report their happiness because there's a feeling of guilt in saying that I wish I never would have become a parent. I mean, nobody's going to say that. People who are single sometimes regret not having kids. Yeah, but for me personally, so far, I have not regretted that. I've enjoyed the freedom that I've had because that's just a higher value for me. I appreciate being able to make decisions without worrying about taking care of someone else or making sure that someone else is okay with my decisions. If I take risks or make bad decisions, I'm basically the only one that pays for those. And I've enjoyed the life that I've had. That's not for everybody, but when you hear that studies show that parents are happier, I tend to question those studies, and that's kind of what this video is verifying as well. Pretending that having kids makes everyone happy can cause a lot of damage to people who don't really want to have kids. The idea that you need a romantic partner to be emotionally stable is not necessarily true either. We're taught that love completes us, that we are halves searching for our other halves, that without a significant other, we are somehow lacking something fundamental. But psychology tells a very different story. Attachment, the deep sense of being connected, understood, and supported, does not form exclusively through romantic relationships. It can be built and maintained through friendships, family bonds, mentorships, community ties, and even the relationship you have with yourself. The belief that romance is the only path to emotional security is not a scientific fact. It is a cultural construction reinforced by movies, advertising, social pressure, and centuries of tradition. Some single people do feel unhappy, and that deserves honest examination. But the critical question is whether their unhappiness comes from actually being alone or from believing that being alone is supposed to make them unhappy. Loneliness is not caused by the absence of a partner. Loneliness is caused by the absence of genuine connection and understanding. And I'm sure at our age, you can probably all relate. We can all relate to being in a relationship and still feeling lonely, or at least feeling frustrated. These negative feelings that we have when we're in a relationship tend to be not looked at as so serious as the negative feelings that we have when we're alone, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm expressing that in the best way, but if you're alone and you say you're lonely, it's like the end of the world. You got to hurry up. You got to go out and find someone. You can't die alone. You can't live like this. But if you're in a relationship and you're feeling frustrated, or you're feeling lonely because you're not connected, if you're frustrated, okay, that's just part of a relationship. You've got to roll with the punches. You can't just leave someone when you feel frustrated. If you're feeling lonely and you admit to that and you say you're not happy because you're not connecting, that makes you seem, in some cases, like a very selfish person. Like, you have, on paper, everything looks great here, but you still feel lonely and you're not connecting with that person. Well, just stick it out, and you made this commitment to this person, so stay with them and work it out anyway, and you'll get better. That to me seems to be the trend. Like, when you're lonely, you have to fix it. When you're in a relationship, you stay in the relationship and you work it out. Not always. I mean, there's contradictions to that too. People quit relationships too early sometimes. But on the flip side, I just don't think that feeling lonely sometimes when you're single is a good reason to just go out and hurry up and find someone and get into a relationship. You can be deeply lonely in a marriage, surrounded by people at a party or sitting across from someone at dinner. And you can be profoundly content and connected sitting alone in your apartment on a Saturday night with a book and a cup of coffee. The difference isn't about the number of people around you. It's about the quality of connection you feel with others and with yourself. Self-determination theory, one of the most well-supported frameworks in psychology, identifies 3 core human needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is the feeling that you are directing your own life, making your own choices, and living according to your own values rather than someone else's expectations. Competence is the sense that you are capable and effective in the things that matter to you. Relatedness is the need for meaningful human connection. Single life satisfies autonomy in ways that coupled life often cannot. When you are single, you wake up and the day is yours. You decide what to eat, where to go, how to spend your evening, what career risks to take, what city to live in, how to arrange your living space. Now, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, because if you have a job, you have people to answer to, and you still have family, you still have friends. You might still have some people to answer to if you're single, so it might be an exaggeration to say that you are completely free. However, there is a difference. And as I've gotten older, my preference has been to not have someone living with me directly to answer to. And those connections, when I feel the need for connection, I can have a connection with family and friends that is genuine, and I think better than the connection that I've had in relationships. In fact, because there's no mask, there's no disguise, there's no putting your best foot forward. Whether you do that consciously or not, when you're in a relationship, you're trying to make yourself look as good as possible. You get embarrassed if the person sees you, like sees your flaws, basically. In a friendship, there's no attachment. I mean, I think of the relationship I have with my best friend. We could not call each other and not talk for months, and then when we get back in touch, it's like we pick up exactly where we left off. Imagine if you did that in a relationship and just left for a couple of months, you would be in all kinds of trouble when you got back. So I just think in a lot of ways, friendship it's more genuine and even a deeper, more authentic connection than being in a relationship. But as I said, sometimes you still have people to answer for even when you're not in a relationship. You're not as likely to have to negotiate, compromise, justify, or explain. And it's not selfishness, it's the natural human need to feel like the driver of your own existence. For many people, this sense of control over their own lives is the single greatest source of happiness and satisfaction they have ever experienced. In contrast, modern romantic relationships can sometimes undermine autonomy in subtle but significant ways. The early stages of relationship are fueled by dopamine. It's the same neurochemical involved in addiction. That rush of excitement feels incredible, but the brain adapts quickly. As the novelty fades, other emotions begin to surface: jealousy, anxiety, fear of loss, insecurity, comparison with past partners, or perceived rivals. For some people, a relationship becomes less a source of joy and more a source of emotional turbulence. The intense highs are matched by equally intense lows. The fear of losing the other person creates a constant undercurrent of anxiety. The need to manage another person's emotions on top of your own becomes exhausting. None of this means that all relationships are unhealthy. Many are deeply rewarding, but it does mean that for certain people, the emotional cost of being in a relationship outweighs the benefits. And choosing to remain single is not avoidance, it is wisdom. There is also a darker dimension to romantic relationships that deserves honest acknowledgement, even though it makes people uncomfortable to talk about. Domestic violence and intimate partner violence remains serious problems in the United States. Every year, millions of Americans experience physical, emotional, or psychological abuse from a romantic partner. These situations rarely begin with obvious violence. They almost always start with emotions that society tells us are normal, even romantic. A partner who checks your phone because they're worried about you, a partner who gets upset when you spend time with friends, a partner who wants to know where you are at all times. These behaviors are often framed as signs of deep love and devotion, but psychologically, they are warning signs of anxious attachment and controlling behavior. And it doesn't always necessarily that it's going to mean that it's going to escalate into violence if someone has an insecurity and they're anxious and maybe they're blowing up your phone. Uh, I would say most of the time it probably does not escalate to violence. I mean, who am I to say? I'm a guy, so I've experienced the other end of that where I have a very anxious ambivalent attachment system, you could say, and that depending on the person, I can either act avoidant or anxious. So I've been on both ends of that, but in the past, I tend to have chosen partners who are more insecure than I am because I hate that feeling of being anxious. I'd rather be the avoidant one in that little dance. And so basically, I have experienced partners who have been that insecure. And obviously, I can't really speak to this so much because I don't know, it could be different for women in that they have more to fear because they're more likely to become harmed by their partner if the partner commits violence. But I would say, from what I've witnessed, it doesn't always escalate or doesn't even generally escalate into violence, but it's still not healthy. If you have an attachment system that is anxious and you're with someone who's avoidant, that's not healthy for either person. This little dance that we do in relationships Is it even worth it? I mean, that's what you have to ask yourself, basically. From possessiveness to control to violence, sometimes it evolves that way. It begins with small boundary violations disguised as concern and escalates through emotional manipulation and isolation from support networks. It can eventually result in physical harm. The majority of intimate partner violence occurs during breakups or immediately after, when the controlling partner perceives a loss of power. They often describe their actions as being motivated by love, but what they are actually experiencing is a collapse of the identity they built around possessing another person. Choosing to remain single removes a person from this particular category of risk entirely. That is not the primary reason most people stay single, but it is a meaningful benefit that is rarely discussed. When your emotional stability does not depend on one specific person, the conditions for obsession, possessive behavior, and the devastating spiral of control simply do not arise in the same way. Single people have the freedom to build emotional security from multiple sources: friends, family members, colleagues, community groups, therapists, mentors, rather than placing all that weight on a single romantic relationship. This diversification of emotional investment is not just safer, it is psychologically healthier. Research consistently shows that people with broader social networks experience greater resilience in the face of stress and loss. Friendship, in particular, deserves far more respect than American culture typically gives it. We treat romantic love as the highest form of human connection and dismiss friendship as secondary, less important, less meaningful. But friendships can provide everything that romantic relationships provide: emotional support, companionship, shared experiences, intellectual stimulation, physical affection in some cases, loyalty without the intensity that sometimes tips romantic relationships into dysfunction. Friendships are built on mutual enjoyment rather than mutual need. They do not require exclusivity, cohabitation, or the merging of finances and identities. They can be maintained across distance and time in ways that romantic relationships often cannot. And they allow each person to remain fully themselves without the pressure to become half of a unit. Single people tend to invest more heavily in friendships than married people do. They spend more time with friends, provide more support to their social networks, and maintain more diverse relationships. This is true regardless of whether their married counterparts have children. The social richness of single life is one of its greatest and most underappreciated advances. Freedom is another. The freedom that comes with being single is not just the freedom to do whatever you want on a Friday night, although that is certainly part of it. It is the freedom to define what a meaningful life looks like for you without being constrained by someone else's vision. And that's so true. When you're in a relationship, every decision you make has to be bounced off the other person. Otherwise, you're not being a good boyfriend or a good girlfriend if you just make decisions without considering the other person. There's such a big difference and a weight off your shoulders when you release the need of having to have someone. You also release yourself from the constraint of having to answer to someone. And even when you're not in a relationship, if you feel like you want to be in a relationship and that's something that you really need, you're always picturing yourself with another person and how that other person is going to react to your decisions. Even if you're single and that person's not even there, sometimes you basically torture yourself because you're imagining what it's going to be like to be in a relationship and what this imaginary person is going to, how this imaginary person that's not even in your life yet is going to react to these decisions that you're making. Society teaches us that meaning comes from romantic love, marriage, and children. But meaning is not inherent in any particular life structure. Meaning comes from how much significance you invest in whatever it is you choose to do. A person who devotes themselves fully to their career, their art, their community, their friendships, their personal growth, or their spiritual practice is living a life every bit as meaningful as someone who devotes themselves to a spouse and children. The difference is not in the objective value of these paths. The difference is in whether you chose your path freely or followed it because you felt you had no other option. Single people who have consciously chosen their lifestyle report high levels of purpose and meaning precisely because they have the space to pursue what matters most to them without distraction or compromise. Their time, energy, and resources flow toward the things that genuinely excite and fulfill them, rather than being divided among obligations they didn't choose. Solitude itself is a profoundly valuable experience that American culture badly undervalues. We are taught to fear being alone, to see it as a punishment or a failure. But solitude is where some of the most important human development occurs. When you are alone, you learn to sit with your own thoughts and emotions without distraction. You develop the ability to self-regulate, to manage anxiety, boredom, sadness, and restlessness without immediately reaching for another person or outsourcing your emotions to fix those feelings. This capacity for emotional self-sufficiency is not just useful, it's essential for psychological health, whether you're single or in a relationship. People who cannot tolerate solitude tend to enter relationships not from a place of genuine desire, but from a place of desperation and dependency. They use their partner as an emotional crutch, outsourcing the work of self-regulation to another human being. This creates relationships that are fragile, codependent, and ultimately unsatisfying for both parties. In contrast, people who have learned to be comfortable alone bring strength and stability to their relationships when they choose to have them. They do not need their partner to complete them because they're already complete. This is one of the great paradoxes of human connection. The people who are best at being alone are often the best at being in relationships because they choose partnership from abundance rather than scarcity. That's really important because the abundancy versus scarcity mindset is one of the keys to happiness, I believe, in everything. Whether you're talking about money or love or resources, anything in life, if you view whatever that is as abundant rather than scarce, you're going to be better at getting that and pursuing that and feeling better just all the way around. And there's always two ways to look at it. It depends on your perspective, really, whether love is abundant or scarce. Because if you feel like you're not getting opportunities for love, you're probably not looking around. You're probably focused in the wrong places. You're probably looking for love in all the wrong places. And once you realize and open your eyes to your surroundings, you will see that love is abundant. Maybe it's not always the case that relationships are abundant, although I think everybody really could have a significant other if they wanted one. We're just not willing to change our standards at all times. We're not willing to take what we can get, put it that way. But love itself is all over. And I'm not trying to make light of the fact that some people are blocked off to that through trauma and need extra therapy to actually see that. But I'm just saying that it's out there and you don't have to be in a relationship to experience love. When you're in a relationship, there are certain biological needs that you get. I mean, we haven't really talked about sex, and it's a little uncomfortable to talk about, but that is basically a lot of times what people really want when they're in a relationship. They just are not willing to admit it. And sex is something, believe it or not, you can actually live without. And a lot of us treat it like a drug, and it's not really love. So if that's the reason that you're in a relationship, personally, I don't think it's the right reason. Now, having said that, I'm going to wrap this up, but I do want to say I feel like maybe I was a little bit too one sided on not having kids. I mean, if you have kids, that's great. Also, if you're married, that's great. I guess I'm presenting from my perspective a different side to that. And I hope that anybody can get something out of this video, even if you're married and you have kids. Just the fact that maybe you could be a little more independent in your relationship, in your marriage. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. I'm not qualified to give advice on marriage. I've never been in a relationship that's lasted more than 2 years. But the whole point of this video is that it's okay to be okay with your own solitude. And to work towards that, I think, is good for everybody. I think it's good all the way around to kind of keep some distance in relationships, and just to know that if you want to be single or if you are single, it's okay to enjoy that. It's okay to not give in to the pressures of society. And if you have kids, like I said, that's great. I think the world is going through some kind of a population crisis, from what I've heard, to the point where Generation Alpha is so small. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's dropped off so much because people aren't having kids that we're basically never going to catch up. And we're heading for an extreme population decline, because not only would the younger generations have to start going back to whatever the average has been per person, 2 kids per person, whatever it has been, in order to make up for the population that has been missing, they would have to increase that. Like, basically, I'm not explaining it very well, but Generation Alpha would have to have start having 5 kids each to go back to, for us to go back to normal population. So if you've had kids, that's probably a good thing. I mean, I've always said the world is overpopulated, but that's more in jest than anything, because I don't know exactly what could happen to our whole infrastructure if we had such a huge population decline. There's probably a lot of negative things that would happen to us based on that. But Gen X, you're probably at the age where your kids are grown, which is the best thing, because they don't have to be dependent on you, and you have somebody there that is going to be with you as you grow older, and that can be a beautiful thing too. So I'm not knocking that. I'm not saying nobody should have kids or nobody should be in a relationship, but I'm just basically presenting the other side. When I heard this video, I thought it was important to present that, because as Gen Xers, we're thinking about how, I mean, some of us are thinking about retirement. I don't think it's necessary to think about retirement. It's just probably better for our peace of mind if we think about slowing down a little bit at our age. And I'm going to wrap it up there, and I'll probably do a part 2 because this video isn't completely finished. I hope you've enjoyed it. Sorry for the stammering around a little bit. I'm still trying to get comfortable with the camera, but I would like to keep doing this, so I would appreciate any comments or questions or anything like that. Thanks. Have a great day.